Production planning role in different production systems. The role of production planning will depend greatly on the production system used. Let's discuss this briefly. So the first production system that we can consider is the make-to-order. Here you produce only things for which you have the order. So if you don't have the order, you don't actually produce the product. You don't produce anything in advance. And here actually the optimal production batches are not that important because this is usually small batches or even individual products being built. More modern way of producing is the so-called make-to-stock. So here you produce ahead of time without a customer order. In other words, you are producing the inventory from which you try to satisfy the demand. Therefore, you are triggered by changes in the stock. And most of all, there is no direct link between the production and the behavior of the customer. You have a big buffer between you and the customer, which is called inventory. And it's most likely inventory in many places. So it's not just inventory in your factory, but also inventory in the retail chains through which you sell. A mix of that is the make to assemble. And here we mix some elements of make to order and make to stock. So for example, you produce components using make to stock. So you create inventory of them, but the end product is produced using make to order. So you don't assemble, for example, a car if you don't have an order from a customer. And the last type, which sometimes also occurs, it's make to engineer. So here we actually design the product with the customer first, and based on the design, we start the production process. The difference between this and make to order is that in make to order, we have a standardized product, which we only trigger when the company calls us. Here we also have to design the product. So let's move to some examples to see which type of production is used in what kind of industries. So make to order, we can see, for example, in computers. So Dell in B2B channel, they would usually not do it without having an order. BMW or rather Ferrari would most likely use the system. Sushi is another example of the food being only produced when there's an order, and some luxuries brand as well. Make to stock is most of the market, especially when it comes to fast-moving consumer goods. A lot of fashion brands like H&M, Gap. Food is obviously done like this because we create huge inventory and then we move it to retail chains. And computers in B2C sector would be most likely also producing in this way. So we produce them, we ship them to the retail chains, and once they sell, we produce new ones. Now, make to assemble is also pretty popular. We can see it in food, for example, Subway works like that. So they prepare the elements from which they're gonna do the sandwich, but the assembly of the sandwich is done only when there is a customer ordering specific type of sandwich. Car makers also use it quite often, especially when it comes to spare parts. Chairs are being in this way, and also from the fashion sector, we can say that Zara is working to some extent like that. So once they roughly know what they will be producing, they buy the materials, but the production of the specific items is done once they get the orders from the stores, once they see that there is a demand. So it's a different way of producing than, for example, H&M, although they are in the same industry. And when it comes to make to engineer, we can have a custom-made furniture manufacturers here and other custom-made products. As we said, depending on what type of production you've got, the role of the production planning will differ. And let's see how it differs. So in make to order, you simply aggregate all the orders from the customers, you check availability, you create a production order, define the sequence of production, and that's it. Quite often you don't even do the optimal production batches because, as we said, this is a low volume production. Now, the role of production planning in make to stock is totally different. So here you actually have to define optimal production batches and sequence of production. And on top of that, you have to find out a way to be influenced by the change in the inventory level. You don't see the demand, so you have to have a trigger mechanism that looks at the inventory and tells you now you should produce a specific production batch. Obviously, in make to assemble, we'll have a mix of those two things. So on one hand, we'll be defining optimal production batches and having a lead time as well as trigger mechanism based on inventory for components. But then we will also be aggregating orders from customers. And on the basis of that, we would be defining the sequence of assembling of finished products. So as you can see, the role of production planning will hugely be influenced by what type of production system you've got. So whenever you are trying to figure out what the company should be doing, first try to decide what kind of a production system they're using, and this will tell you what kind of role they should play in the whole ecosystem of the supply chain.